A poetic translation of the first creation story from the book of Genesis in the Bible from Dr. Timothy K. Beale. When gods began shaping skies, earth was bottomless brine, dark on deep's face. God's breath brooding on water's face. God said, "Is light," was light. Gods saw that light was pleasing. Gods divided between light, between dark. Gods called to light day. Gods called to night dark. Was evening, was morning, day one. God said, "Vault amid waters," dividing between waters, two waters. Gods made vault, divided between waters, under vault, between waters, over vault. So it was. God's call to vault, skies. Was evening, was morning, day two. God said, "Waters under skies, gathering to one place, dry ground showing." So it was. God's call to dry ground, earth, to gathering waters called seas. God saw that it was pleasing. God said, "Earth greening green, grass seeding seed, fruiting tree making fruit of its kind, with its seed in it on earth." So it was. Earth bore green grass, seeding seeds of its kind, tree making fruit with its seed of its kind in it. God saw that it was pleasing. Was evening, was morning, day three. God said, "Lights in sky, vault, dividing between day, between night. They are for signs, for times, for days, for years. Lights in sky, vault for light on earth." So it was. God's made two great lights, great light ruling over day, little light ruling over night. Stars too. God's put them in the sky vault for light on earth, for ruling over day, over night, dividing between light, between dark. God saw that it was pleasing. Was evening, was morning, day four. God said, "Waters swarming swarm life, birds birding on earth in sky vault's face." God shaped great sea monsters, every creeping life, waters swimming with their kind, every bird wing of its kind. God saw that it was pleasing. God blessed them, saying, "Burst forth, breed, fill waters and seas, birds breed on earth." Was evening, was morning, day five. God said, "Earth bearing life of its kind, beast, creeper, earth life of its kind." So it was. God's made earth life of its kind, beasts of its kind, every ground creeper of its kind. God saw that it was pleasing. God said, "We make human in our form as our image. They rule over sea fish, over sky, over beast, over all earth, over every creeper creeping on earth." God's shaped human in his form. In God's form shaped them. Male, female shaped them. God's blessed them. God said to them, "Burst forth, breed, fill earth, tread it, rule over sea fish, over sky bird, over every life creeping on earth." God said, "Behold, I give you all grass seeding seed on all earth's face, tree with tree fruit in it, seeding seed for you as food, to every life, to every sky bird, to every creeper on earth with life being in it, all green grass for food." So it was. God saw everything made. Behold, it was very pleasing. Was evening, was morning, day six. Skies, earth, all their array were finished. God's finished doing work in day seven, rested in day seven from doing all work. God's blessed day seven, hallowed it, for in it he rested from working, shaping, doing.
So this month, our theme is story, which I think is a fantastic theme. And if we recall, the bigger framing for that theme is how do we live our value of liberating love through the practice of story? So I think a good way to enter the practice of story is through the stories of creation. Right? Some of the very first stories of how do we understand where we come from, who are we, what are we, and trying to put some framing around the mystery of how life began. Now, these are stories that we have been telling for generations upon generations, right? 5,000 years or more of people trying to understand where life came from and where our world came from. And over that time, there have been a number of ways of framing these stories. We've heard a couple of them already this morning. Some of them are creation out of chaos, right, or creation out of something. Some of them are creation out of nothing, sometimes referred to as ex nihilo. That's what the everything seed was, right? This tiny seed emerging out of the vast nothingness of space. Whereas the creation story, at least the first one from the Bible that we heard this morning, or the Hebrew texts, is creation out of primordial existence, right? There isn't nothing. Gods start with something. And that particular translation this morning is one that I heard at a winter convocation at a seminary that I was attending at the time. And it's from a Hebrew professor. So he actually translated it directly from the Hebrew text. And he is having this same conversation around stories that I want to invite us into this morning. Around how do our stories and the way that we tell them inform how we live our lives? And how do we create or alter the stories that we have or that we tell so that those stories encourage us to be more in community with one another, to be better stewards of the earth, which we have not been doing so well the last 100+ years, particularly with industrialization. And so I wanted to share that translation, as it may be a little different from the way that you all have traditionally heard that first Genesis story of creation. But one of the beautiful things about creation stories is that they're non-exclusive. Because they are story and they point to different elements of our existence and the way that we understand the world, we can hold multiple stories at the same time. Right? This is true even within the Bible for those who look to that as a source of wisdom. Genesis doesn't have a creation story, it has two. Right? It has the story we heard this morning and then the story of Adam and Eve, which are actually from very different times for biblical scholars. And I will say, I'm not myself one to proclaim Christianity as my own faith, but I think within the context of our society, it's important for us to look at and examine those stories because they are a part of our broader understanding of our majority culture that we live in this morning. But creation stories aren't just found within religion, although they are found in all religions and have changed and evolved over centuries. They're also found in popular culture. Right? One of my favorite book series, called The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, starts out with its own creation myth. I'm going to read it because I love this passage, and it speaks to what we're talking about this morning. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legends. Legends fade to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The way Robert Jordan frames that creation story invites us into telling stories about creation that are intentionally carving out a moment in time. Right? Our own creation stories can be told in many different ways, and where we begin them and where we end them makes a difference to how the story looks and the lessons we might take from it. Within Unitarian Universalism, we embrace this changing of the narrative, this sense that the story doesn't end in who we are as a faith tradition. We've seen it recently in the restructuring of our principles, right? When we were formed, we created a set of principles in our bylaws that held us together in covenant with other Unitarian Universalist congregations. Not a creed saying you have to believe this and this and this, but a covenantal understanding of how we want to be in relationship with one another and the world around us. And recently we rewrote those, and it took on a very different form. And it could be easy to say it's a new story, but it's not. Those new principles, those new ways of thinking about how we are in covenant with one another are directly informed by the principles that we had stated previously. But they're also informed by all we have learned and the ways we have grown and changed together as a faith since those first principles were written. And I love that that is written into our bylaws, that we have to change. We have to re-examine how we are in covenant and community with one another. It says that part of living our faith as Unitarian Universalists is to intentionally examine our own stories and what those stories say about who we are and how we live in the world together. We do this also within our congregations. You heard this morning we'll be having a startup gathering in early February, the second weekend in February. And part of that startup of me getting to know you all and you getting to know me and how we work together will be storytelling about what are the stories of Merging Waters Unitarian Universalist congregation. How did this congregation come to be? What are the creation stories that we hold as part of our understanding of what it means to be in this congregation? So we hold the big societal stories, we hold the community stories, and then each of us also hold our personal stories of creation. Right? Our lives begin at birth, but our stories may begin long, long before that. For me personally, I have a very matriarchal matrilineal. Thank you. There we go. Matrilineal. Matrilineal story. Right? So I hear the story of my great-grandmother, who was the firstborn and a librarian, my grandmother, who was the firstborn and a teacher, my mother, who is the firstborn and a program manager at IBM, and myself, who is the firstborn. There's a strong story that I inherited and that I have to figure out how to pass down to my children. But those stories change over the generations. And my children will receive both my stories and my spouse Eric's stories. And they'll have to figure out how to weave those stories into something that helps guide them in their lives. Right? Just as each of us do, inheriting stories. My grandmother tells stories of her time working on a reservation in northern Minnesota. Stories that are painful for me to hear, because I have an awareness of the trauma that was inflicted in the creation of those reservations that my grandmother really doesn't have the depth of understanding of. And at 93, she's probably not going to be able to have those conversations in a way that I would want to. So she tells stories of her time on the reservation of violence, of people hurting each other, and wondering why those people are that way. And those are painful stories that I have to figure out what to do with, knowing that she and my ancestors are part of a story of violence in this country. I also have ancestors that came over on the Mayflower. I know my ancestors have done harm in this country. But I also hear stories from my grandmother of the time she took her students across the Canada border, and on their way back, one of the girls needed to use the restroom at the border crossing, and the border guard refused because she was Indian, Native American. And my grandmother just about ripped his head off. So the love and the care was there as well. And how do we tell those stories of our ancestors? How do we incorporate the stories of who we are from those who have gone before us? Some of us are lucky to have stories of strength and beauty and wisdom that we can carry forward. Others of us have stories of pain and hurt and damage that we need to break with. Some of us don't receive any stories from our ancestors at all. And we may need to claim new ancestors in our lives, people who inspire us, whose stories we want to embody and live out and recreate in new ways in this world. Whatever ways that you are living into your own stories of creation in this community of faith, we encourage you to do that with intention. Right? To not just take the stories and carry them forward, but to take the stories and examine them. Take the stories and really hear and understand what is behind them, what is within them, and how they inform the ways that we live. How can we reshape our stories to create a world that is more just, a world that is more equitable, more generous, more loving, a world that holds up each person, each being, and creation itself as sacred and holy. I don't have answers for you on that one this morning. But it's a conversation that we'll continue to have throughout this month about how our stories impact who we are and how we live in this world together.